You want me to tell you a statistic that's going to blow your mind? That
Absolutely.
I think it's over 57% of homeschooling families make less than 50,000 a year.
Welcome to Fatherhood Voices, breaking the toxic cycle. Dive in as real dads bear all, the mess ups, make ups, and every heartfelt moment in between. It's raw, it's real, and it might just change the way you see family.
Welcome to another edition of Fatherhood Voices. And I'm excited to have Claire Dinold on today. And she's been a strong advocate of homeschooling. And we're going to get to hear about her journey with homeschooling and how it started. And she's a native of California and now lives back east. And she's going to share her story. She's going to introduce herself, and then we're going to be curious to find out because homeschooling has become such a prevalent topic, especially since COVID, and people just got frustrated with how local legislators were imposing all these regulations on the kids, and they're like, the hell with this, I'm pulling my kids out, and we're going to go ahead and create these communities. And it's been beautiful to see that there's so many resources in it now that there weren't a couple of years ago. So, Claire, welcome, and I'll let you share with the audience who you are, where you were from, where you're from, and we'll just start with, whatever you want to share.
All right. Well, thank you. I'm super excited to be here. I really wanted to share on your podcast because you talk a lot to fathers, which I think is important to talk about this topic because I'm usually speaking to mothers about homeschooling. So I thought that was an interesting angle. But originally, I'm from actually New York, another place that people don't think homeschooling is as popular. But through my journeys, I ended up in LA for quite a while in the Valley. I had my son out in California, and I didn't leave California until essentially like when everybody else left, until COVID started, and everybody got kind of locked down, and I went back to family after that. So, but my homeschooling journey started when I was a child, since I was homeschooled my whole life. I actually think I went to a private school called Waldorf school, similar to a Montessori type. I know California is very, very big on Montessori's as well, but I went to one of those when I was a kid, probably just for 6 months. And then we left the education system as a family to homeschool years and years ago when it was considered cult-like and weird and homeschoolers were odd and there were no resources and your options were very slim. So that's a little quick background of how I even got started on this whole journey.
It's funny that you mentioned that you talk to a lot of mothers about this and not a lot of fathers. And I'm going to share a little story with you about homeschooling. There was a point in time where at one time we had talked about homeschooling. I have 3 girls, they're adults now. And when I was talking to their mom about it, the one thing that went through the back of my mind, and this is before my spiritual journey and having this awakening. So when I was still my narcissist and ego and pride, what was going through the back of my mind, and which probably goes through the mind of a lot of fathers, is, oh no, there's already a lot of stress in the house, and now you want to homeschool them? What the hell is that going to do to our relationship?
Oh.
And it's that ego and selfishness that kicks in because you're already stressed, you're already doing the household chores and taking the kids to and from school. So how is that now going to continue to take away from me?
Right. And I think that's one of the things we have to think about as parents, as people who decide to have children. And it's a hard thing to get away from. I've been guilty of thinking about me as well. But when I had a child and I decided, I was going to homeschool, I decided from the beginning. I decided from day one, he's not going to leave my side. This is how I was raised. This is how I'm going to raise him. And there was no option. So they talk about non-negotiables in life. This was my non-negotiable. He was going to be home with me, raised in the way I thought was best for his development. And whoever was with me was going to have to come along for the ride because there was no option in that. My child comes first. And I think in today's day and age, children really do need to come first. I believe strongly in the family unit. But I also believe that we need to realize our children are going to be the next generation that are going to be facing a world that we're not ready for, that we've never had to face. And if we don't put them as a foremost, hold on a second, as a front and for leading topic that we need to have as the absolute epitome of where we need to set our standards and goals, then the children of the next generation are going to struggle more than anyone's even thought we'd struggle this generation. I think the next generations are going to be even harder.
You know, when you talk about homeschooling, the first thing that comes to my mind as a father is, what about that social interaction? What about the kids not, you know, I want my kids to experience the good and the bad. Like, back in when my kids were younger, I wanted them to experience a little bit of bullying so we could figure out how to navigate that. So if they're getting bullied as a child, how do we, now come up with tools to be able to prepare them? And then also just a social interaction. So when we talk about homeschooling, that's probably the number one um, thought that comes up from a male perspective.
Everybody.
And what about girls? And so having those friendships and relationships. So can you touch on that a little bit?
Yeah, so you're not the only one. I hear this all the time. The question about socialization, why aren't they going to be weird? How do you make sure they're socialized? I hear this so frequently, it's almost crazy, because I understand when my generation was homeschooled that people thought that, because I was homeschooled with my brother and sister, and there wasn't another homeschool kid for, I don't know, an hour drive. I mean, I wouldn't say we were isolated. Just so you know, my father is an engineer. He was a professor. My mom was an English major. We did not homeschool for any weird reason. My mom just thought it was better for my brother and I. My sister kind of came along for the ride. Once you're homeschooling two, you might as well homeschool a third. But she thought it was better for my brother and I to be homeschooled. She saw the way we were learning in our nice private school, and saw that emotionally it was too much for my brother at a young age. He kind of was exhibiting some emotional social issues that would have led him to be placed on medication, essentially. And she did not want that. This is in the era of Ritalin. We don't do so much of that now, but she refused. She adamantly did not want that to happen. She even told his teacher early on, I'm going to pull him out of class halfway through the school day, because I know this is emotionally too much for him at his age. And he was in first grade. And later on in that year, that teacher, Mr. Dickey, hey, Mr. Dickey, he even said she did the right thing, and more parents should be that involved in their child's life to realize that he needed to come out earlier on. At that same time, she did the same thing for me, because I was just about as abundantly full of energy as any kid you've ever seen in your life. There was no sitting me down. My parents said I was either going full speed or sleeping. There was no in between. I don't think I napped since I was born. But that being said, we're living in the middle of nowhere, essentially, upstate New York. I wasn't in the city. 3 kids homeschooled with not a lot of social interaction opportunities. There were no co-ops and meetups and, all these things that I can get into later that homeschoolers have available. Yet, I will tell you, I was highly active in sports. For some reason, where I was, they allowed me to play on the local sports team. And because I was that kid who had to be number one, just the most go-getter you've ever met, I ended up winning states and going to nationals and being a very high-level competitor on my sports team. So I ended up being pretty popular. All the school kids thought of me as the international student. Literally, they're like, you're the international student. I don't even know what it's like to be an international student. Apparently, I think they're cool. But I was looked at as that. I went to the proms, the homecomings. I was voted team captain of my team. And I'm the homeschool kid, the weird kid. Wow. So that's a little bit about me. And I'm just saying, if you put in perspective, I came from an environment where you would think I should have been weird because I had chickens and goats and farmland in middle of nowhere. But my parents were big on exposing us to a lot of things, taking us to different places, environments. A lot of our teaching growing up involved interacting with different cultures and people, which allowed us to be social and feel grounded in who we were. So if you take my example and extrapolate that out, my brother and I both ended up in successful, forward-facing, prominent careers that required a lot of social skills. So take 2 kids who you would have thought would have ended up relatively socially stunted based on the narrative of homeschooling. And my brother is now a salesperson for a large manufacturing company. He's worked overseas, South America, everywhere. And we got through that because our parents believed in exposing us early on to different social settings, different social situations. So I think a lot of socialization is up to parents. And that sounds big, as in, oh, you got to take them to, I don't know, South America and show them something that, no, it's simple. Different social situations is really day to day. For example, my son has come with me to work more times than I can count. And he has come to engineering offices, medical device offices. He's come to podcasting studios. He's come to different churches. Different cultural environments, so many you can't even imagine. And he is very social. People think he's like a mayor. They used to call him the mayor because he'd meet more people than I meet. So I think it really is up to the parents when it comes to socialization. And I think that's not as big of an issue as the media likes to make it out to be. I think it's kind of like a narrative to push down homeschooling because, well, to be honest, that takes away finances from the school system. So we don't want that many.
Well, let me ask you a question, because, you came from a household with professional parents,
Mm-hmm.
engineer and so forth. What about the families that don't have those means? Maybe they're, I'm just going to say lower income, don't have the extra resources and so forth. Can homeschooling still work? Because I almost feel like sometimes it's those kids that come from these poverty-stricken areas that would benefit more from homeschooling, but yet finances, can that become an obstacle? Can you still be successful um, with homeschooling?
You want me to tell you a statistic that's going to blow your mind?
Absolutely.
That comes from 2023. So I'm not pulling a statistic from years ago. And it comes from, I think it's just the Census Bureau. So I'm not even using a biased stat.
Okay.
I think it's over 57% of homeschooling families make less than $50,000 a year.
57% of homeschoolers, their household families, their household makes less than 50,000 a year.
Yep.
Really?
Yeah, people don't realize that. I get told all the time, oh, well, if I was wealthy or I need to be wealthy to homeschool my kids. No, the funny thing is, I find a lot of the people homeschooling are more middle income families because they realize they don't take their kid and put them in a private school and pay the school $60,000 a year and say, you guys got it covered. Great, I don't need to worry. They're educating my kid perfectly. No, these people realize there's an issue with the education system and they need to be more so involved than those families with the finances who could homeschool, who could hire private tutors, etc. They just take their money and give it to a private school, which is assumed to be doing a better job than the public school system. So I say that because I think people don't realize how many people make far less than they expect and still prioritize their child's education. Because the best thing you can do is be overly involved with your child's education and give them the most one-on-one tutoring possible. And I mean tutoring, not the parent to child, but the most one-on-one education, holistic education system you can possibly offer. So you know exactly how that child's doing, how they're learning, what they're learning, and how their progress is. So as far as resources, you don't need to. Obviously, if more than 57% make less than 50K, we're not talking about tons of doctors, lawyers who are educating their kids homeschooled method. These people know there are resources out there, an abundance of resources. We have full curriculum. Singapore math is one of the top math curriculums used in the country. And this curriculum puts kids well ahead in math. And we know math is a huge area that most American children are struggling. And there are curriculums that do everything: reading, writing, arithmetic, science. You can buy a whole curriculum for $400 and educate your child. So, and beyond that, there's online schools. OutSchool is one I use. I'm not endorsing them. I'm just telling you that OutSchool is basically a teacher's program. My son signs on every night at Mondays for a little coding class, and he has a teacher. They Zoom call and they have a class online. So while it's called homeschooling, I almost think in today's day and age, it's a little bit of a misnomer, because really what's happening is parents are taking on home education. They're taking on educating their child, whether it be through forest schools, co-ops, There are homeschool type schools that meet up 3 times a week and provide the curriculum. There's ones that meet up once a week. There are different types of more holistic educational paths that people can take that I think gets all grouped under homeschooling because it's not the typical public or private.
I never knew that. So I just, as you were talking, I looked up, OutSchool
Yep.
and full courses. And you said there's probably tons of other programs
Mm-hmm.
out. But
Oh, yeah.
this line that and then I came from a very different generation. Grew up, born in the '70s and so forth. So when I think of homeschool and without having done the research and so forth, just we're going to bring them home and then we're going to have to go and figure out how to put all this together. To me, it just seemed mind-boggling and frustrating. Like we don't have the tools. And I know in the '90s and 2000s is when you were brought up with homeschooling.
Yeah.
And now you're starting to share like, hey, there's tools out there, there's resources, there's meetups,
Yeah.
there's groups. So and I think especially after COVID, when COVID started and people were forced to stay home, it created that almost like launch
Yeah.
into homeschooling. I seen a statistic, not to, I think it was on your actual
Yeah.
Instagram.
Yeah.
Could you
It's
tell me?
a
Can you share
it's
about
a
that?
hockey puck of a jump into homeschooling. I believe in the US there's 3.9 million homeschoolers. I don't have the exact stats in front of me, but it has statistically significantly jumped. 5 million homeschoolers around the world. But here's what I really think happened during COVID. I think when children were brought into their homes, two things happened. Parents realized where their children really are as far as learning. Okay. So the system's different. I don't know if you went to public school in the US here, but the system's changed over time. Things like No Child Left Behind really just push children forward without giving them a foundation to understand. So math, I said, is a big issue in the US as far as where kids stand on average with understanding of math. What happens is this: math builds upon itself. And if you don't have a solid foundation in, say, ninth grade, you're not going to do well in 10th grade. And then you're just doing memorization. And then you get pushed forward to 11th grade and you're really falling behind because you never understood ninth grade math. Now, I say that because I think that's what's happening to a lot of kids. I don't think America's children are bad at math or bad at reading. I think the system is fighting against kids who need a little more time to understand, and even some who want to go a little bit faster and get bored with the system. So it's a tricky situation. Parents saw that their kids weren't learning what they expected they were. A lot of parents don't like what's being taught in the education system now because it really does seem a bit political. I think we've politicized education. It's now a talking point. And I think really what needs to happen is we need to take it back to the roots. We need good reading, writing, and arithmetic at the very least. Kids need to be proficient in that aspect. Because the reality is, if you know how to read and write, there is nothing you can't learn in this world that hasn't been written about before. I mean, truthfully, if you understand how to learn and if you love learning, then there is nothing, I feel like personally, there is nothing I can't figure out tomorrow. I know how to read. I know how to write. I excelled in math as a kid. And honestly, people say one of the biggest differences between me and public school children is I don't see any boundaries. There's no ceiling. Now, I'm not going to go and kick the actual door down, but I will figure out a way to get things done. And I think that attitude is what people say is lost in the American workforce today. They don't know how to figure things out. And when I say that our children are going to grow up to a world that we haven't experienced yet, what I mean is they need to figure out how to sustain a living, considering inflation and where things are now. We need to think outside the box so that they can really support themselves, their families, and not just do the typical college prep class or college prep course that is high school.
I love this because I think about schooling, well, when I was in school, but then when my daughters were in school, and how they're not allowed to move forward unless you had a real innovative teacher that was going to take the time, because it's more work for them, to take them away from the lesson plan that everybody else is doing to give them more work. I thought about how many times they just were stuck and stagnant because they were waiting for everybody to catch up.
Yeah.
Or sometimes they struggled and didn't get the help that they need. So I can see where homeschooling comes in, and you can go at their pace and you can add more,
Right.
add less based on where they're at in their journey of learning.
Right. And I mean, how brilliant do you think some kids or a lot of kids could be if I let you study what really interests you, what really is your passion, let you study it until I mean, until you're sick of it. Where would that take you? Would we have a lot more people who are essentially what's better to be a C student across everything or an A student in certain areas? I mean, really when you allow a kid to study and move at their pace as fast as they need to, if they're just devouring information, it's a beautiful thing. We want to encourage that. We want them to have no limits for their ability to gather information and develop a skill. So when I think about education, I loved math as a kid, and when I was 15, I was taking calc, pre-calc, calc 2, calculus, differential equations at a local private college because I excelled in math. Now, today, I don't know how to do 90% of my son's homework, but at that time, think of the confidence that gives a kid to know, I know how to complete these math problems. I do it better than 90% of my peers. Not that I'm trying to be better, but the confidence that instills a child to be good at something, really good. I mean, I feel like we have a society of people who are more depressed. Did I lose you?
No, sorry, somebody was knocking, so they'll have
No
to edit
worries.
that part out.
No, I just was saying, like, I feel like our society has a lot of depression in adolescence. And I think if they were given the ability to really dive into things they were interested in, not just social media, not just looking at their phones, they could develop more self esteem, more confidence, and really move forward versus the society we have that I think I read a book recently called The Anxious Society, which is where we seem like we are.
You know, you brought up something that's a hot topic,
Oh
math.
boy. Yeah.
And then you talked about Singapore math.
Hmm.
Uh, Tell me, what is a resource that even parents that aren't homeschooling their kids yet or are considering it,
Yeah.
but then a resource for math? And you said Singapore math. Can you tell me a little bit more about that? Because I know most children struggle with math, and you're right
Sure.
because it builds on top of one another,
Yeah.
lesson after lesson. And what happens is, if you, I'll use myself as an example. I wasn't strong in math, so I just chose not to pay attention
Yeah.
and just disconnected because I guess I didn't want to show my vulnerability or maybe feel like I was dumb. And
Yeah.
then what happened is because each lesson built on top of the other, there was a point where I got lost and I just gave up in high school
Yeah.
and had to make it up later on in college and go back to the basics and
Right.
relearn the fundamentals.
Right. Well,
What's
the thing about that, which is sad to hear, is math is something that really gives you confidence. This might sound silly, but do you know completing a math problem correctly makes you feel good? Getting the right answer makes you feel good. I mean, my son to this day, when he does all his math correct and he nails it, he'll come up to me and tell me, "Aren't I good at math?" I'm like, "Yeah, you're great. You're doing fantastic." Because you feel good. And when you get in that cycle of not understanding and then you're just trying to memorize and memorize the problem, memorize the way this problem goes and the next one, and hope that that's the one that comes up on the test because that's the one you know that you've memorized, and then it doesn't. And then you blow that math problem because you don't really understand the concept. It's devastating. Like, it's really an awful feeling. I have done poorly in some math, and I will tell you, actually, funny story. My first year of calculus when I was 15 at the local community college, I basically bombed it because I was busy on the crew team hanging with my friends and didn't really want to pay attention. So, not even through the whole semester, I didn't even go that far. My dad stopped me and said, "I'm pulling you out of the class. You're taking it again because you can ace this class and you didn't. And I know for a fact you have the ability." So he yanked me from the class. I went back to the same teacher. You want to talk about embarrassing? I went right back to the same teacher and took his class and aced all the classes from then on out. But it was because he said, "Hey, look, we're going to reset, restart." He saw me doing a poor job and said, "No, no, no. We're going to reset this, restart it, and you're going to learn it the right way because I know you're capable." And we're not seeing that now. So when it comes to resources, you can look up Khan Academy, Saxon Math. I took that when I was a kid. It's a great math program. Every homeschool curriculum comes with a math program. They're all different. And the best thing about homeschooling is if you like X curriculum for your first grade, you can change it to second grade. You can change to a different program second grade. I mean, you don't have to stick with one. Halfway through the year, you don't like it, change it. I mean, you can tailor the education to that kid. Do you like Minecraft? You want to do Minecraft math? Great, there's a curriculum for Minecraft math. I mean, how great is that for a kid to have something that they're interested in and then teach them math through that? My son loves reptiles. You know, I can literally go online and find a math program about reptiles. And if you want to know where to find a lot of these resources, homeschooling families, they all go to YouTube, or not YouTube, I'm sorry, they all go to Facebook. They have Facebook groups called Homeschooling for Beginners, Homeschooling Mamas and Ideas. People talk about curriculums and resources all day there, all day. So it's all out there. If you just type in, to Google math curriculums, homeschool, there's going to be so many. And a lot of times what I do, we are lucky to have a homeschool store nearby. I bring my son to the store and say, hey, look through books that look cool. The other day he chose Handwriting for Boys, which is, he writes about bugs and forts and saws, I don't know, weird things that's great that I don't care about, but he loved it.
You know, one of the things that we do with the podcast is we look for a concept or a topic where we can extract an idea and turn it into a PDF, a free resource.
Yeah.
I would love to have my team collaborate with you and come up with a PDF on someone that's exploring the possibility of homeschooling and the different resources. I would love to do that with you if you're open to that.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
There's resources where it cuts down some of the learning curve, because I can tell you, I know parents that have wanted to homeschool and then they got frustrated because they were overwhelmed with information, or they didn't know how to seek out the information. So just you sharing the different tidbits and best practices, it can definitely make an impact on a family that maybe think it's overwhelming. Now you have an Instagram that's built a pretty big following, and it's live, leaf, and learn. Well, live.leaf.learn on Instagram. And I was going through and looking at a lot of the different tips and resources that you were offering. Can you tell me where that inspiration came from to now take what you learned and you said, you know what, I'm going to become a voice for homeschooling, and I'm going to go ahead and share different tools, strategies. When did that happen? How did that start?
So it started just a little under a year ago today. At the time I was living in Dallas, and nobody I knew directly around me homeschooled their child. I was the only one. And I love the people I knew in Dallas, but they'd always ask me, when are you going to put your son in school? Shouldn't he be in school? He's going to be so weird socially. Shouldn't you put him in school? Which is a funny thing that people are telling me, who was homeschooled my whole life. So you have to realize they're great people, but they're asking a person who was homeschooled, who did well being homeschooled. They all like me. When am I going to put my own child in school? And I got this question all the time. So at one point, I think I just got frustrated. And I'm not really somebody to go and speak out directly or, slam someone or say something like that. And I just said, you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to start posting what we do. This is our life. This is what we do. I get asked all the time, well, he needs to go to school. Why isn't he in school? Well, let me show you without showing you or telling you what school is. What are we doing? And honestly, after I did that, I haven't heard anything from anybody about putting my son in school, because the reality was not that I was so frustrated, but people don't know what homeschooling looks like. And I'm not necessarily the homeschooling mom who does not, a very regimented schedule of wake up, X, Y, and Z schoolwork, lunch, more schoolwork. There are people who do. My brother and sister-in-law homeschool their two children, and they have a much more rigorous schedule than I do. And their kids are doing phenomenal. But mine is more laid back, partially just because that's my personality. And I believe in doing more than doing bookwork. Also, my son is a high energy boy who likes to be dirty in the mud 24/7. And my brother's children are beautiful little girls who are very studious. Say what you want about boys and girls, but there are some that are wildly different. And my son needed a more outgoing environment. So yeah, that's where that comes from.
You know, one of the things that I was thinking about is, how do you foster the love for learning for your kids? And I know you said that if they were interested in, like your son's interested in reptiles, so you found a math curriculum for him that had to do with reptiles, and then there's curriculum for kids that are interested in Minecraft. So, what are some other tools that you use to kind of keep that love going? Because they're in an untraditional model. They probably have friends in the neighborhood that are going to school, and they're maybe they're missing out on recess. Um, how do you plug that in so they don't feel like they're left out?
Well, so unsurprisingly, actually, there are homeschool groups everywhere. I could go meet up for a recess with any one of our homeschool friends groups any given day. There are so many adventures and events going on. Today, I'm missing a battery making or battery tutorial event here in town that one of the homeschool moms is putting on who knows about this. On any given day, there is going to be a ton of homeschool meetup groups, science groups, classes, you name it. So I don't think they ever feel like they miss out. If you're a parent who wants to actually get out there and see what's available and put your kid in that kind of opportunity, you have no issues. There really aren't. There are some, I will say, there are some areas I've had people reach out to me from very remote locations. I mean, very remote, probably like northern, middle of nowhere, North Carolina on a mountainside, and they homeschool their child. And there it is a little harder. It is harder to find that community because, say, the public school's an hour away. But what I always say to those people, you can do things like OutSchool. My son loves it. I know it's not in person, but he has friends from around the country that he meets via Zoom every Monday night. You could do multiple classes. He knows them all. He says hi to them. He knows what's going on in their life. They're just sort of like pen pals via Zoom. So there are ways, but the majority of people who are interested in this live in a community area where there are other people they can meet up with on a weekly, daily, however often they want basis. I turn these meetings down often because I'm just tired. I can't be at every single one of them.
So, a question that just came to my mind.
Yeah.
How do you separate the role between parent and educator? How do you draw the line?
I don't think of myself as an educator. I think I'm always just the crazy mom who's willing to go learn new things 24/7. I'm always, because I was homeschooled, I'm always up for learning something new. It doesn't matter what it is. Cool, you've got something you're going to teach me. Whatever your expertise is in, I will learn. If we're at the auto shop getting a hole in our tire fix, which happened last week, I'm going to ask them, oh, cool, how do you do that? Can we come watch? So I think of myself as just someone who's got a lot of curiosity all the time as an adult. And I am willing to go ask questions, get involved. The coffee shop is a bakery here. I'm going to ask them in the next couple of days if we can go learn how their bakery works because I'm curious. So I am a mother. I think I'm a cool mom because I do fun things all the time. But I'm an educator, comes as part of being a mom. I think as a parent, you're always an educator. You're going to educate your children on the world, on people. This is just expanding that into directing the education of my son. Because to be honest, I'm not going to be teaching history. He's going to have to go through books for that or courses. There are some things I just have no interest in going through again myself. So I will lean on programs, classes. There are also online education programs. There are a bunch of them that just do the teaching online. It's not how we do things right now because my son's only 7 and I don't feel like he needs to be stuck in front of computers. But there are great online resources for parents who say have to work during the day. So there are parents who do work part-time, stay-at-home moms like to work part-time jobs or even work from home. I work from home. If you want to have your classes online, it's often easier to run them through that tutorial program than it is for you to go through all the book work while working. So, I mean, there's an abundance of educational opportunities when it comes to homeschooling now that there weren't years ago when we were all the weird culty kids who never got to do anything fun. But
thinking about, I was thinking about my daughters are in their early 20s,
Hmm.
and when they fill out a job application and they
Yeah,
want transcripts, or they want either your GED or diploma.
yeah,
How does a homeschooler get around that? Because as they go into the job market and they've been
sure.
homeschooled, how do you show that certificate or completion?
So let's see, I got to think back to, because I'm not at that phase yet. You can get GEDs and transcripts. You usually have to apply. Each state's a little different for how this works. If you go on to, I'll tell you about this later. We can put it somewhere in our notes, but there's a website that will give state specific requirements for everything. So hslda.org is who lays out the requirements for each state. So it works a little different everywhere. You meet certain requirements. Doesn't usually start until high school, ninth grade or so, but you basically meet requirements. You get grade, you get what's it called, points, units, I can't remember. You get credits, that's what it is. You get credits for everything you do, and then you get a diploma. But a lot of times homeschoolers will do dual credit starting in high school. They literally finish their associate's degree by the end of high school, and then they go on to 2 years of college and graduate early. I remember I worked at, a lot of places I worked as a kid, they never required my GED or any transcript. I don't know how many places you've worked where they required it, but not a lot of people asked. I'm not saying don't have one, but it wasn't a big hindrance for me to get a job. But post that, I got a high school diploma from Clonlara. It was a correspondence school. They gave me my high school diploma through homeschooling. We sent in paperwork. They saw the work I did. A lot of times what it would be is my college credits and my grade sent to the high school program, which is where they gave me my high school degree from. But it was a dual credit, so I was earning credits to go to college.
Okay, so now as homeschooling has become very popular, there's a lot more tools and resources to be able to document the journey of homeschooling.
Oh, yeah. Okay. Yeah, and there are resources out there for each person to document it on your own. We did X hours of this, X hours of that. My son takes tennis every week. It's PE. There are a lot of resources, but typically you don't have to start doing too much documentation early on. It starts a little further to become more rigorous. But each state, like I said, does have their own requirements.
So let me touch on something very controversial.
Sure.
And that's AI. And how does AI now creep into homeschooling, and how do you find that balance? Or are you at that point where that's even something that you're exploring, or how do you
I'm not at that point. I find it fascinating. I'm not against AI. I think the world is moving in that direction. The world is moving to more technology, more AI. We are going to need to know how to utilize these things, and we're going to need to know how to use them productively, how to be well versed in AI so that we are more competitive in the job world. That being said, there are schools. There's one out of Austin. I don't know them personally, but there's a school out of Austin, Texas, that is using AI to teach the children, which I find a fascinating concept. It's teaching children at their own pace based on the information the AI system is gathering. I feel like this could be a really great option depending on how it works. Like I said, I don't know. I haven't been involved in it, but the theory of it sounds really good on a large scale for how we could really tailor the education system to each child. So I think AI has a lot of promise. Depends on the execution, and I'd have to see more about it. But I do believe we need to be well involved with how it's going to be utilized in the future, because the reality is that's where the world's going, and I don't want my son behind the curve when it comes to knowing these technologies.
I know you've shared, one of your ways to get away from the misconceptions about homeschooling was you started your Instagram site.
Yeah.
And now people aren't bugging you about when you're going to put them in school anymore. You're just putting it out there and educating people.
Yeah.
Do your children, because I'm sure they interact with other students that aren't homeschooled, how do they get around the misconception of homeschooling? Does that even come up?
No.
No, it doesn't. This is all they know, and it's just they're not.
No. Well, I mean, the reality is kids don't ask kids a lot about school at 7 years old. So my son doesn't get asked a lot. it's not something that comes up. They're usually talking about the fish they're looking at, or, you know, the frogs they're catching, or the snakes. I mean, it's just not something that comes up. Now, as he becomes a teenager, this will probably come up more because kids like to know where you go to school. But I think Jordan Peterson, I don't know if you've looked into him much, but Jordan Peterson said that you want to be likable as an individual. You know, I'm not saying you have to be a people pleaser, but likability is important. And I think my son needs social skills, that he knows how to interact with people, and then it won't be an issue. And you don't need to like everyone. Likability doesn't mean you have to like everyone. It just means you have social skills that allow you to be involved in different groups and different cultures and different clubs, etc. And they want you around. And I actually talked to my son about this because it's part of social life. You know, he needs to know how to interact. So I think that's an important thing to just think about. It's always just exposing your child to different environments.
Now, you know, we've talked about a lot of the pros and the positives of homeschooling, but what are some cons that parents need to be aware of when they're considering homeschooling, that maybe they step in, they go like, oh my gosh, this is more than I can handle? What are some of the things that can come up that maybe you didn't realize, you know, when you started, because you were an earlier child of the 90s and early 2000s, but
Yeah.
and I know there's a lot of resources now, but what are some things that come up now that you wish, as you started, you know, homeschooling your 7-year-old?
Yeah, well, I mean, just before I came here, my son asked me for the 1,500th time to find another Lego piece in the Lego bin. I mean, you get, there are questions that come up, and I would say that is a deal breaker sometimes, because I hate Legos and I don't want to look for another Lego piece. I absolutely despise it. Can we please go back to the Legos that just gave you blocks and you built whatever your imagination was, not the booklets that tell you to build certain things, because I got to find all the pieces for the darn things. Little rant, but just, if anybody knows Legos, it just drives you nuts. So when it comes to things that I think can be hard, I think anytime you take full responsibility for anything, there's a lot of self-doubt that comes into that. So my entire son's education lies on my shoulders. And I'd be lying if I said I'm not concerned sometimes, worried about where he is, how he's doing, worried about what it's going to look like later on. It would be a lot easier to take and educate his education and pass it off to a system, pass it off to private school, public school, anyone else. So I think when you take on literally the future of your kid so wholeheartedly, it can be a little nerve-wracking. And I think a lot of people echo that concern, and I hear it a lot. Are we going to do the right thing? Am I doing the right thing? So there's a lot of self-doubt that comes into play with homeschooling. And I think you have to be very grounded in your decisions, that it's what you feel is best, but also realize that you can change at any time. You can pivot and decide that you can put them back into the education system. So I think people don't realize the amount of self-doubt there is initially when it comes to parents educating their kids, and time. I mean, homeschooling is a large amount of time initially. As they get older, I think as a teenager, I basically educated myself. I went to college classes, I took the classes, I did well, I went to the professors. You know, I think it becomes pretty hands-off, because you raise children to be independent, self-starters, critical thinkers, education lovers. You raise them that way from a young age, then you should be pretty good to be hands-off later on. I think my mom started writing romance novels later on. But so I think that's one issue. I think people get worried about finances for homeschooling. I think a lot of times it's having both parents be supportive about homeschooling. And I do find that there's not always the support on both sides initially being the key thing, because most people who have told me that initially one spouse wasn't on board or the other found that later on they thanked the other one from pushing them in that direction, because the outcome or the progress, most of the time, it's not for everyone, can be astronomical. I mean, they really can do phenomenally well. But I think it can take a little bit of buy-in from both parents and a bit of discussion if both don't start out 100% on board. And like you mentioned earlier on, there are some obstacles you really got to think through when you've got, 3 or 4 kids homeschooling around the clock in your house 24/7.
Mm. So we're coming up on Father's Day weekend,
Hmm.
and what would be a message that you would give to fathers? Because they're not going to see it till after Father's Day, but what would be a message you would give to fathers to advocate for homeschooling? Someone that's resistant. I know you started to share about once they get there and they see it and they realize like, oh my
Yeah.
God, thank you. But what about getting to that point with fathers that are, and especially if they're in two different households, you have mother and father separated,
Right.
which unfortunately is a bigger statistic than I was mind blown when I seen the
Yeah.
stats. And now you have a father, a man in their ego and pride, because a lot of men are in
Hmm.
the ego and pride,
Yeah.
that are just want to go the traditional route, and sometimes they won't even do what's in the best interest for the child, because if the mom wants one thing, they're going to do the polar opposite, because they just always it's always a fight of control.
Right. Right.
What's your message to those fathers that are, and I know this is a loaded question, and there
It
may not
is.
the right answer, but your passion, and because not only were you a product of homeschooling, and then
Hmm.
now your 7-year-old is a product of it, and you have your nephews and nieces that are part of it.
Yeah.
What would be something you would say to fathers that,
Ooh.
man, they just they're not going to hear it from the mom, but maybe
Right.
from you there might be something that you say that just may open up that dialogue and not just be so quick to shut it down.
Right. I mean, I think it comes down to, what do you want your legacy to be? Do you want your child to be your legacy? How does that look for you? Because if you take your head in that place and take it out of any ego, any narcissistic thoughts, and just think, this is my legacy, these are my children, I'm not going to be here. And what can I do to set them up for the utmost success possible? I think that would be what I'd tell them, is really think about that, because that would help thinking, this is your product. This is what you leave to the world. What do you want them to be like? What do you want them to look like? And if you think that your most important job on this earth is to raise the next generation and to leave a legacy of children who were, grit fighters, took it to the end, I'm trying to think father things here, and really fought for what they wanted and what their passions were, then you'll take that, the raising of your children, as a number one priority. So I would push them to think of that, and then explore the stats, explore the numbers, really let go of what your preconceived notions are, and look at the options out there to make your legacy the best possible legacy you can leave.
Wow, beautifully said, beautifully said. A thought just came to me. I
Yeah.
know school districts are against charter schools and homeschooling because it's a revenue issue. It's they
Yeah.
get daily per day funding for your
Yeah.
child being in school. So
Yeah.
I was just thinking, I don't know if this occurs, or maybe this needs to be a movement,
Yeah.
but to parents at homeschool, do they get any type of compensation from the government? Like, can you apply for like
Yeah.
grants or stipends to be like, hey, we're not tapping into the money that we pay for property taxes, but we at least
Right.
a little bit of financial to be able to cover some of these explorations,
Sure.
trips, and so forth. Does that exist?
So I'm not sure. I think, and I might be wrong, but I think in California you might have a way to do that. But I don't know off the top of my head, but I heard somewhere it's been looked at, but it's a double-sided sword when people talk about this. In theory, it sounds great, but then it would involve the government getting involved in your education again, which then brings us right back full circle, which is what people are trying to stay away from. So I'm not going to get hugely into that, except for I know some states offer resources. And the other option you can look at is teachers discounts. A lot of homeschoolers are a part of homeschool schools, um, and they will give teacher discounts for homeschooling parents because you are educators. So that's a huge option. Homeschool groups on Facebook list all the places you can get discounts and resources from. But like I said, there are some of those things available, But again, it's a bit of a double-edged sword, and I'm not sure which states have actually approved it and how to go about it. Definitely something you can look up online, though.
That's so cool. That's definitely going to be something that we're going to put in this PDF that we create together because,
Yeah.
I think of, Michael's and Hobby Lobby, how they offer these teacher discounts. But if you're
Yeah.
homeschooling and you're coming out of pocket, hey, being able to save some money, will help,
Yeah. Yeah. And there's an enormous amount of free resources online. I think there's even like free resources Facebook group for homeschoolers. And you can go and download free, reading, writing, arithmetic resources online. So that's why I say people are shocked when I say more than 57% of all homeschooling families make less than $50,000 a year, because the reality is it's true and they can do it. So,
wow.
Yeah.
As we start to close out what's been a beautiful episode, because you've shared so many resources, you've broken so many myths about homeschooling.
Try.
And man, you've got me even thinking about wanting to homeschool. My daughter just had a baby last year, and never did I consider homeschooling as an option. But just hearing you talk about the creativity and just finding the subjects that they excel at and focusing on those. And yeah, you really got me thinking. There's going to be some conversations that are going to start happening with my daughter over the next couple months, because I wasn't even thinking about it as an option.
The homeschooling community is very welcoming, and really they're happy to educate anybody. So I really encourage anyone who's interested in homeschooling, reach out to a local group, find people in your area. You can just type in Facebook, your town, and look at some groups and just reach out and say, hey, I'm interested in this. I'd love to know more. Can I connect with someone? I had someone the other day meet myself and another woman down at our local fishing dock to just talk about homeschooling, because she's curious, and she's come and hung out with us twice. She doesn't homeschool her children, but she's wanting to the next year here, and she wants to see what we're all about. So she may decide to, she may not, but we're happy to have her join. So I'd say get involved and just see what it's about. And if it's for you, you'll know being there hands-on.
Wow. What would be your closing thoughts for parents that are homeschooling, and things that you've learned along the journey that I guess best practices, or don't do this,
Okay. I would say don't worry. Don't worry so much about where your children are, where they measure up as far as the state guidelines, the testing is concerned. If your child's not reading and they're 8 years old, don't worry about it. As long as you're providing an education-rich environment for them, they will learn at their own pace. As long as you're not just sticking them in front of an iPad and ignoring them the entire day, but you're providing books, etc., they will learn. I didn't learn to read until I was 11 or 12, but I went to college when I was 15. So I think a lot of times people get very worried about where their child is, how they're doing as far as state standards are concerned, or if they were to be put into school, would they be behind anywhere? And I think it's a holistic approach you got to look at. So a lot of times people get worried. I recommend a book. It's called Growing Without Schooling by John Holt. It's the book my mother read when she was about ready to throw in the towel because her daughter wasn't reading until she was 12. It's the book I recommend because it really kind of sets your mind at ease, so that you realize the natural process for a child is to learn. That is what they are designed to do, fundamentally designed to learn. So as long as you provide that environment, they will learn. And not everybody learns at the same pace. That's why one-room schoolhouses were beneficial, because you had older and younger kids all mixed together, and the ones that learned faster learned at the pace of the older kids, and the ones that learned slower were learning at the pace of the younger kids. And this could be in different subjects. So I often say the best thing you can do is just try not to be too overly concerned with that aspect.
Wow. Thank you so much for sharing all your knowledge and resources on homeschooling. And, I encourage other parents, and I'm going to just, if you want more information, you have your Instagram, live.leaf.learn. And as I've gone through it and just looked at your Instagram about you exploring and adventuring with your son and just documenting your journey, it's beautiful. And
Thank
thank
you.
you for sharing, like I said, resources, best practices. And I know there's going to be a
Absolutely.
powerful workbook that's going to come out of this that's going to help
Yeah.
parents that are exploring their journey of homeschooling. And you're definitely going to help them cut through a lot of the red tape and a lot of the insecurities that they may have on whether or not they can do that.
Yeah.
So,
Yep. And absolutely reach out to me anytime. I try to answer almost all my DMs, as many as I can. If I miss it, follow up, but I try to get back to everybody. So I'm absolutely here to be a resource.
thank you so much. And with this, we'll call it a wrap for another episode of Fatherhood Voices. And this one is definitely not about breaking the toxic cycle, but I think it's more about healing a relationship with your children, with the school system, and getting away from the school system, and now tapping into their creativity, into what they like. And yeah, with that, have an amazing weekend, Claire, and thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Bye.
Bye bye.